Welcome back, everyone. Get a good break? Before we get back on it, I want to remind everyone that we're in listen-only mode. So please click on chat, as all of you are doing right now. I love that. Just keep it going to share all your comments and to ask your questions. The awesome news is that all of this greatness is coming to you during, all this greatness coming to you right now at NAIFA's DEI Impact Week is being recorded. And you can find what you want to hear more of or what you missed on the Talent Development Center website. And if you missed the last or the opening conversation, man, you got to go check in and check it out. It was awesome and fascinating information and stats and ways to make the change for women here in financial services and outside our industry as well. Now, in our next session, we explore the DEI aspects of long-term care in underserved markets with Chris Gandy and with Michelle Prather. Chris Gandy is a NAIFA National Trustee and founder of the Midwest Legacy Group. A former college and professional basketball player, Chris successfully transitioned his greatness on the basketball court to stardom in the field of insurance and financial services as a thought leader and frequent speaker, who's been featured in such publications as GQ, Advisors Magazine, Insurance Newsnet, and NAIFA's own Advisor Today. Michelle Prather is Senior Regional Sales Director of Care Solutions at One America, rising from its Care Solutions team in 1998 to educate financial professionals about its suite of products. She often serves as a keynote speaker for conferences throughout the country, conducting numerous client workshops, as well as financial professional training aimed at the art of delivering the long-term care conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Chris and Michelle.
Thank you so much, Stephen. My goodness, you are doing a fantastic job. I really appreciate that introduction. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hi, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's well and blessed and ready to go.
Absolutely. You look great in the red tie. You always rock the red tie. So thank you so much, everyone. So what we're going to do, we're going to kind of go back and forth, Chris and I. And but I want to first, because we're talking about long-term care and how do we take that conversation to underserved markets, let me give you some context around the long-term care conversation, get everyone up to speed on what we're seeing, and then we'll get back to Chris in just a moment. So let me share my screen real quick. Give me just a moment. Here we go. So when we're talking about the long-term care conversation, it oftentimes is talking about preparing for retirement. That's where this conversation tends to go. So when we're talking about retirement planning and how we get long-term care into that, we oftentimes will use a mountain to describe those retirement years. So of course, as we are climbing our mountain, as we're working through our working years, we consider that to be our accumulation phase. And then as we reach the top and we start to work our way back down the mountain, we consider those retirement years to be our distribution phase. And this is where we focus on income planning and income strategies for those retirement years. So what are some things that we may face as Americans on our way back down the mountain? Well, of course, having enough income, this could absolutely impact our retirement. The low interest rate market, this has had a huge impact on how we face retirement planning, especially over the past 10 to 15 years. But healthcare costs, this is a big deal when we're talking about retirement planning, because we don't know what conditions, if any, that we may end up having later on in life. And we definitely don't know what those future costs for that condition could be. But of course, long-term care is such a part of retirement that we don't see enough focus on, because these are the types of expenses that could really implode a good, solid plan. So let me shape your view on long-term care. Let me show you what the costs are, and then we'll talk about the trends in just a moment. So right now across the nation, it's approximately $100,000 per year. Now this would be for a private room in a nursing facility, but this is about the national average cost. Some areas are less, some areas are more. Again, we're going to use a national average. We know that medical expenses go up. They don't tend to go down, they tend to go up. And medical inflation tends to be anywhere between 4 and 6%. But I'm going to lowball this. I'm going to use a flat 3.5% inflation. So in 10 years, that number looks like 144,000. And in 20 years, it's staggering at $203,000 per year. But there are some trends that we're watching, we're paying very close attention to, and I hope that you do the same. These trends will and should have a huge impact on these costs. So let me share those with you. So the first trend that we're paying attention to is just the number of people that will probably be needing care all at the same time. Right now, we call that group of people the baby boomer generation. That's the next group up for needing long-term care. 10,000 baby boomers are turning 75 every single day in 2021. That's mind-boggling if you think about how many people are entering into their retirement years. But here's the deal with this group of people. The majority of them are still doing pretty well. They're healthy, they're starting to retire, starting to travel, and so forth. We haven't seen the bulk of this generation need the care yet, but we do expect to start seeing this here in about 10 years. And at that time, we expect very high demand for care and assistance. The question is, will there be enough supply? Will there be enough care providers and care facilities to take care of such a large generation? Number two, longer life expectancies. Medical technology is doing great things for our bodies, but we haven't seen them fixed our minds yet. So we are seeing an increase in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. Those types of illnesses require a much longer period of care, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So this is a big American issue. We have seen decreases with heart attacks, cancer, strokes, HIV. That's great. But we have seen an increase in Alzheimer's. Last stat that I saw was a 123% increase in Alzheimer's diagnosis. So this is a big deal. Number three are the family dynamics and how we have seen that change. Adult children aren't necessarily taking care of their parents like we've seen in previous generations. We have seen an outsourcing for mom and dad's care, and primarily because there's two working parents in a lot of homes these days, but also us adult kids, we move away. We might not live in the same community. We might move away for job opportunities or maybe marriages and required relocation. And then number four, believe it or not, this is a trend, folks. It's our government. Now, regardless of how you may feel politically, there's one thing that we all agree on. Government always changes. So what they have available today, as far as programs are concerned, may or may not be available 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We just really don't know what it's going to be. But here's the big one. As I mentioned a moment ago, Alzheimer's. According to the Alzheimer's Association's updated numbers for 2019, there's approximately 5.6 million Americans with this diagnosis, and we expect these numbers to triple by 2050. So again, we have a big problem, and it must be incorporated in those retirement planning conversations, because this will be one of the most expensive things that people face in their retirement years. So these are the current trends. Oh, excuse me, one more. So we oftentimes will talk about average length of care for nursing facility. And oftentimes the numbers are, a couple of years for men, a little bit longer for ladies. Alzheimer's right now has an average length of care of 8 years, meaning half of Alzheimer's patients need care for less than 8 years. But the other half will need it for longer. We just really don't know where that will be. But here's some real numbers for you. So the AALTCI.org website shows that they polled 7 large long-term care companies, and they asked them, what is your longest claim currently on the books for male clients and for female clients? And these were real numbers. So as you'll see here, of the 7 companies, 5 of the 7 men met or exceeded what their female clients needed. So oftentimes we think of this as maybe a female issue, and we do see more females needing care. But when it comes to cognitive, dementia, Alzheimer's, and so on, we're not seeing a gender issue because it can last for many, many years, regardless of gender. So this is a conversation that needs to take place with any client, regardless of their gender. Okay, so now I'm going to pull Kristen, now that we've got this update on what are we talking about and what are we facing here as a nation. So Chris, when we're identifying needs in underserved markets, what do you use? What kind of tools do you use to identify those? Would it be family history? Do you talk about cultural aspects? How do you have this conversation?
Well, Michelle, coming from the field and having the opportunity over the last 22 years to work with clients and their families, and the idea of being able to give them peace of mind. When we start looking at just the history and the whole idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's specific markets. It's clear, if you look at the statistics and you look at the data that's out there, there's clear statistical data that point to a disparity in healthcare, and that becomes exponential when we start to get into some of the niches out there. I'll speak from a representative's perspective and also of the African American community, simply because I grew up there, and I'm African American in nature and culture. Some people don't know. They may say, you're African American, you're Black. I'm both, right? And so we find that with that culture, just looking at the statistics, even Michelle, to go even a little further on your statistics, I'm going to add one even to that, of the people that actually need long-term care, that number in the minority community actually doubles because of the difference in healthcare. And so when we look at those numbers, all of a sudden it becomes not only exponential, but it becomes a new pandemic in the future. Is that when you start to look at the impact it's going to have on the wealth in certain communities at that particular time, if you happen to need it. So I'll just touch on my history with long-term care. I first started off in the business just doing basic asset protection and insurance policies. And slowly but surely, I started to realize that everybody out there knows someone who needed some sort of care. And when you start to interview people and start asking questions, you hear the horror stories of, we went through all the money and they had to actually go to a facility that was not favorable, or that it wasn't a great experience. And as human beings, we start to feel through that. And so let me look back at the African American community. So I'm going to give you some statistics specifically in the African American community. Of the people that actually need long-term care, that number actually doubles in the African American community. We saw it happen with the COVID pandemic, is that there was a clear disparity between healthcare and the access to healthcare because of the communities in which the hospitals lie. And so when we start to look at long-term care facilities, we also realize that the long-term care facilities themselves typically are in those communities also. So the access to healthcare for long-term care is not necessarily there. What also is not there is the education. So when I start to look at my family history, and I'll speak specifically around mine and my experience as we kind of have come along, I never heard of long-term care until I got into the business that I'm in. And I spent time in working with other professionals. I spent time as being a professional athlete. I spent time with actors and entertainers and doctors, and I spent time with all those people, and I didn't know anything about long-term care. So if we go back and just look at the history, we have to go back and look at, specifically when we look at the African American, the Hispanic culture, and the Asian culture, we look at a couple different things. We look at, what did we learn from our parents about care, right? What did we learn over time? And what I learned from my parents and my grandparents was simply is that you don't ask for help. And that's a cultural thing, is you don't ask for help, you figure it out. And as a culture, you can't ask people to make informed decisions on information they don't have. There's two types of people in this world, the informed and the uninformed. And we ask people all the time with very advanced conversations. So in our conversation today, Michelle, I'm going to use some of the actual terminology that I use in the sales cycle to get people that traditionally don't talk about long-term care or don't have an interest in long-term care to be very not only interested but very interested in exploring if long-term care makes sense. And so we look at family history. Family history typically, and specifically in the African American community, that it's not prominent to ask for help. When we start to look at family status, one of the things is we're the pride in a African American culture is not one of seeking help nor seeking assistance, but we're willing to actually rely on our children for care. And that I've seen that happen in multiple generations. My grandmother helped take care of her, and then also my cousin. And then, I mean, it's just kind of a perpetual thing. And what happens is until that cycle's broken, if you think about it, one generation, every time that generation passes on, the wealth gets divided in half, right? Can you imagine that? That means that the exponential growth of that pile of money or wealth over the years don't grow as fast as if it's not divided. That's just basic. That's basic math, right? And so when we start to look at the future needs of this, there is a clear distinction that there will be people that, let's call it, have healthcare issues that become prominent and more denounced in the future because of the lack of healthcare, the lack of taking care. And then, quite frankly, as my doc told me, Chris, you can't escape heredity. He goes, it's always 100%. And so in my sports background, you can't escape heredity. So naturally, there's going to be some things that I was born with that at some point can potentially come out in my family. And if you look at hypertension, hypertension runs in my family, and it's not something, I work out, I go to the gym every day, I do all types of things to try to stay on top of it, watch what I eat, and make sure that sodium intake, all those things, drink a lot of water, all those things. But at the end of the day, I remember my doctor telling me a while back, he said, at some point we may want to consider being on blood pressure regulation medication. I said, for what? I go, I was a professional athlete. Do you understand? And he said, no, it's simply, you can't escape heredity. It bats 100% every time. It makes every jumper it ever shoots, regardless of where it shoots on the court. And I said, I understand that. So from a history perspective, Michelle, and last but not least, I just want to talk about perception versus reality, because I know that on the outside looking in, you say, well, that's a community I don't necessarily do a lot of business with, but let me tell you, and the perception versus reality are two different things. When I surveyed 20 of my successful African-American clients, I asked them a question. I said, tell me your thoughts on long-term care. And the first words I heard was, you mean nursing home insurance? Right? And nursing home insurance, I said, well, there's perception and reality. Nursing home insurance versus having access to choices.
Oh, that's good.
Right? It's different, right? It's different than saying, what about having access to choices versus not going into a nursing home? I have choices. What about the perception from can't do, right? Because when you say to someone who's an A personality, you can't do something, guess what they have a tendency to do? They do it anyways, right? Versus you having the ability to do, right? It's a different conversation. And last but not least is versus relying on family, let's rely on our assets to protect us. And so those just slight narrative shifts in a conversation makes it less about who we are and where we came from in the education. It makes it more about where are we going and what are we trying to build and leave in that idea of that generational wealth not being divided numerous times over.
Chris, I hope that every person watching this is taking notes. Every time I talk to you, this is what happens. I learned so much from you, and I've been in this industry for 23 years. You gave me so many good, different viewpoints that maybe I didn't think of before. So here's kind of what I got from this. It starts with education, right? So education gives us knowledge. Knowledge gives us options. Options give us choices, and choices give us freedom. And it all kind of goes in that line. And so who's going to deliver that education? So thank you, Chris. That's fantastic. So we know that there's been an evolution in long-term care, especially I would say probably in the past 10 years, maybe since the last financial issue that we had in 2008, 2009. We know that there's been a traditional long-term care market, fantastic. I applaud anyone who has bought, sold traditional type long-term care. But I do think that it's important for us to recognize that there's been a change in that, and a lot of clients again haven't been educated on that. We've seen some shifts in that market, and a lot of it not anything to do with the companies, just due to the economy and interest rate environment. They had to make shifts in order to remain solvent and strong. And then, of course, with asset-based long-term care, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, taking advantage of some tax laws, which I will also talk about in just a moment. There's really been an explosion in this area because people still have the need, and there's been more education about it. Not enough, but there's definitely been more. Even though asset-based long-term care has been around for 30 years, we've only really seen a lot of focus on it within the past 10 years. So let me ask you about that type. When you're talking to your clientele, do you find that they are aware of traditional long-term care and they've shifted their mindset? How do you kind of talk about the differences between the different options that are available?
Well, Michelle, let me just comment on a couple of different things. When we think about a couple of things, when we think about diverse,
Mhm.
I think we as professionals have to be able to narrate and articulate our conversation to our audience. I believe that is absolutely true, and we have to have the ability to do that. I believe that we have to look in the mirror and say, if we can't give this message to numerous different types of individuals where it connects to them from a cultural perspective,
Okay.
because everyone says this when you mention long-term care. I'll cross that bridge when I get there.
Yeah.
But I always go back to them, and here's one I want everybody to write, because I heard it somewhere, and I said, that's mine. That's going to become mine. That's no longer yours anymore, right? And they gave it some sort of equation so they can relate it to real life, right? So one of the things I've been known for is taking real complicated things and breaking it down and making it bite size for people so they can understand it, right? And everybody wants to know, how does this really affect me? So I always say this question where they say, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I said, okay, fine. I said, well, today we got in the car and we decided to go to Florida, right? So how do you feel? They're like, oh, I'm really excited. I said, okay, so are you going to pack before we go? Or are you going to wait till we get there to pack? And of course, they sit back and they say, well, duh, I'm going to pack before I go, right? And I said, okay, so if you didn't, what would happen? And they say, well, it'd be more expensive when I got there. And the odds are I probably would forget some things. And aren't we really saying the same thing, Michelle? Is this chapter that we're currently in, we're doing nothing than preparing for the next chapter. That's it, which is the reason why we plan. So Michelle, let me just now shift gears. I sold traditional long-term care, and fantastic product, but it was hot, right? Everybody was selling it. It was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Prices were cheap. People were getting it. It was all over the place. And then we saw a shift over the last 10 to 15 years because people started using it, right? Companies underpriced it, series of different things. As advisors, we can't change that, but we can change the narrative of the conversation. And that's what I mean. We can control, we can't control the content that's out there in the market. People are going to Google long-term care, right? They're going to do that, right? And we're going to start having the right conversation with people. And so when I look at cultures, we relate in the African-American community, specifically African-American. So I looked up a couple of statistics, African-American, Asian, and Hispanic. That was one of what they called diversity. So I'm going to speak to that market, is they relate long-term care to dying. And think about that mentally, right? People will relate retirement to die. Everybody knows somebody who retired and then died within 6 months and never spent their money, right? Well, we also know people that have gone to long-term care. So psychologically, we've gone to long-term care facilities and we see people in there slowly but surely dying. And we say, we don't want to do that.
Right.
As human beings, we say we don't want to do it. So how do we connect to that, right? How do we connect to people? We're talking to you about not dying. And so, Michelle, the conversation I love about where long-term care has gone is the idea of a product that we can either use it, or use it. I know you've heard me say that before. The
Say
idea
it
you
again.
use it, you either use it, or use it.
I like it.
What about if we can shift some of your assets? So either you use it in retirement as another asset,
Mhm.
a conservative asset, or we use it when you for long-term care
Mhm.
if you need it, or it will go to your family if you're no longer here. And one of those three things, Mr. Client, will happen. It's just a matter of time. And so when we have those conversations about assets, if we can take 5% or 10% of your assets and leverage them in a way where you can use it as a conservative asset, or you can use it as a tool for generational wealth and giving wealth to your family, potentially tax-free, right? That's always a beautiful thing, right? Or you can use it if you ever had to need some sort of care where you can't do all these things. And we described the ADLs. Well, when it's a conversation like that, Michelle, typically, as you see some of the things that we talk about, clients are like, huh, okay. Because the narrative is it's too expensive, or we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I mean, we all know those objectives. Those aren't going to change. What I believe, though, is we need to change our conversation so we connect to those markets. Specifically, if we're going to connect to, and I can speak to the African American space, is we can't talk about the wealth that we're trying to protect. No.
Mhm.
We have to talk about choices and freedom.
Love it. I love it.
Because
So,
if we go back to history, just quickly, if we go back to history, the fight for freedom has been constant. And so when we talk about here's a way for you to control the freedom of the future and to start and to give wealth to your family, it's a powerful conversation.
that is so powerful. And what I love about what I'm hearing from you and what you do when you're having these conversations with your clients, you're balancing the emotional side, because this is emotional. It is what it is. There's an emotional aspect to it. How we take care of our families and how we prepare for ourselves and how we're creating that freedom in our future. But you're balancing it with logic, right? So you're backing it up with logic. These are logical conversations and what you're trying to do and using your own assets to take care of yourself. So let me share with everyone what we're talking about so everybody can be up to speed in the tax law, and then I'll turn it back over to you to talk about how you use the tax law and how you encourage people. And then if you could share some examples, I think that'd be fantastic. So let me share my screen. Give me just a moment. So what happened with the asset-based type long-term care? The government really recognized that, gosh, this is going to be a big issue. Long-term care is going to be a big issue. The bulk of long-term care is paid for on state budgets via Medicaid. So how do we encourage people to start planning ahead of time? So let's say what we're seeing on the screen right now is it's Michelle's portfolio. This is I have some moderate assets, some aggressive type assets, some conservative type assets. And if I were approached about long-term care, Michelle, how will you pay for it? Most likely would access conservative type money. It's money I'd have quick access to. I would end up spending that first. Or maybe it's an income stream that I have. The government said, hey, why are we waiting for folks to spend down all of their money to end up on taxpayer assistance? Let's give them tax incentives to encourage to plan. So here's what they said. Why don't we reposition some money? And we're going to allow folks to use life insurance as the first option. We'll talk about that as the tax law, and then we'll talk about the annuity option and that tax law. But they said, let's allow people to use this money while they're alive. And that's what Chris was talking about just a moment ago. If I don't use it for my care, I will use it as a death benefit to pass on to my heirs. But really what we're talking about is turning this into a lifetime long-term care income stream. We always talk about historically as long-term care as insurance, and it is. But if we start talking about it as it's an income stream, as all insurance is, it's a bucket of income to pay current expenses that are coming in. So as soon as these bills start coming, this income starts paying for these bills specific for that. what we're really doing is, providing protection over the portfolio, over our future, over what we're trying to accomplish. So the government, like I said, first blessed the use of life insurance. Now, usually when I say life insurance, and Chris will give his take on it in just a moment. When I say life insurance, most people will have the reaction of, life insurance. My kids are grown, my house is paid for. I don't need life insurance, because they're thinking of life insurance as it has been historically, as part of legacy planning and so forth. But what I tell people and what I encourage people to do in this case, I encourage people to view it as the tax vessel that the government is using to deliver tax-free money to encourage us to move in that direction. Because government doesn't create product, they put tax blessings on products. So if this is a timeline, just to show you how this works, let me get my little laser here. If this is a timeline, here would be day one. I would start tapping into this bucket of life insurance, and it will last for a period of time. So for an example, if I had a life insurance death benefit of $250,000, it's more than what I had, but it's still a finite bucket. I could absolutely burn through it. So there's an option that you could choose to make sure that it never runs out for you, or if you're married, you and a spouse. So the way that this really works, and this is all asset-based long-term care, regardless of company, the options are different, but the concept is the same, and it all works the same way. Remember, the first part is a financial services product. It's either a life insurance contract or it's an annuity, but it will last for a period of time and then run out. The continuation part, or the part that kicks in after your money runs out, there's no cash value or no death benefit here in this light blue part. All it does is it just kicks in to make sure that you continue to have your long-term care expenses paid. So if you think about it, and this is the concept, and this is very important to get, the second part is really just catastrophic, major medical, traditional type long-term care insurance with a high deductible. Now, why would I say high deductible? I say that because clients understand what deductibles are. The higher the deductible on insurance, the less you pay for the catastrophic part. So it's that mutual risk. And that's why asset-based long-term care has really boomed, because there's a shared risk there between using my bucket of money, which is my life policy or my annuity, and then I have that pure insurance coverage part. I just don't want to pay crazy premiums to be covered for the catastrophic. Most clients nowadays are concerned with the long-term care, not necessarily the short-term care. So, Chris, I'm going to stop screen sharing here, and hopefully that made sense to everybody that was listening. But knowing the tax law, the HIPAA law that gave the blessing for life insurance, and then the Pension Protection Act that gave certain annuities that tax blessing, how do you talk about the tax blessings that these products, provide with these diverse markets? Does that ring a bell? Do they enjoy the use of tax-free dollars, and is that encouraging?
Well, Michelle, it's interesting you mentioned that. I just want to kind of, in the diverse markets, there's a tax that they talk about that exists, that on the outside looking in you may not know, but on the inside of these cultures that it happens, and it's called the brown tax. And people may type in, I know what the brown tax is, and the brown tax is the fact that most diverse families will rely on loved ones to help take care of them. Mm. That's called the brown tax, right? And other cultures don't do it as much. And so how do we get away from that? You mentioned the tax incentives. Mm-hmm. So I'm representing the field today, which is fantastic. So I'll use some of the terminology that I use, and I'll say, whose money would you rather use, yours or Uncle Sam's? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, of course, you'd rather use your money versus you'd rather use Uncle Sam's money than yours, right? I said, so are you not taking advantage of that fantastic tax incentive that they've given you to help make sure you have choices? Mm. They're like, Chris, what are you talking about? Right? And all of a sudden it becomes real. What do you mean? And again, it's available to everybody. And the best thing about it, Michelle, is as you get older, annually, it's bigger. Right? So the government's already said, hey, we don't have the money to take care of everybody. Or quite frankly, we have too many people aging. Like, you figure it out, and here's the incentive to do so. And so it's part of our job is to help educate people and get them excited about taking advantage, even if they can't do it,
Mhm.
even if they can't do it because the ratio that's there. But all business owners, unless there's a logical reasons other than I have it, right? All business owners, because of all the tax incentives, if you go to that website, it is fantastic, right? Where you can actually look at it. I have an S corporation, C corporation, all the cool things you can do with with long-term care from a tax favorable standpoint, or even individuals. When they exceed a certain healthcare expense number, they actually get that deduction also. So we don't know, it's an exploration. But we all know if we start to look at the income, when people get to the place of retirement, remember, we're planning for when we get to Florida, not once we're there. So people will say, I can't take advantage of that right now. So, but in the future, based on your ratio of having Medicare, the Medicare supplements, the healthcare, all these other things, are you thinking that we're not going to be about 10%? Well, yeah, probably. Right. So we start doing the numbers, and then you can buy the Cadillac. Right. And if we're going to buy the Cadillac, why not take advantage of that? So, that becomes the conversations more than it is the product. And then the product is just the natural fit. So perhaps if we have money sitting somewhere, i.e., in a qualified plan, that's dead money, CDs, things like that, money that's what I call dead money that could be leveraged, right, Michelle, to help take care of help take care of ourselves, or to protect what we have so we don't have to use our money. Michelle, I'll use this comment to clients. I'll say, I'm going to build the most beautiful structure out there. At the end of the day, if we don't have bricks between the mortar, it will fall. And the last thing I want to do as your advisor is to build something and then we give it all away. I don't want you to work your whole life to build this and then we give it all away. So let's take a small percentage of that to make sure that that's going to be safe.
I don't know if you planned on talking about this, but it was so powerful to me the last time we talked. I'm gonna ask you to explain this. Parent proofing.
Yeah, parent proofing. That was my last comment right there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it's great. Yeah, I ask clients all the time. Let's take a look at all my clients. Let's parent proof your plan, because at the end of the day, if you're the most successful one in your family, who are they going to turn to first when they start to look at help? And typically, it may be you. Right. And so parent proofing your plan is dynamic. So that kind of leads into my conversation of when we get into examples, Michelle. I'm going to use the example of a client right now that we literally, since the last time we spoke on NAFA, we literally have now utilized that terminology. And now we've done some planning on both, not only her parents, but also her spouse's parents because of the impact it's going to potentially have financially on her. So,
yeah, well, that's an excellent segue. So let's move into the examples. I know you shared one last time, but if you could dive into a little bit deeper about this conversation, I'm intrigued about the parent proofing their retirement. How did you start that conversation? And what was their first reaction to it all the way to the end?
Sure. Well, at the very beginning of the conversation, she's a business owner. And I started asking questions around who's the most successful one in your family. And when you start to hear questions like, well, it's probably me. Who's the most financially sound person in your immediate family? Are your parents still alive? I mean, that's a question I think we need to know. I talk about generational, and I encourage everybody on this call, if you're paying attention to this, specifically in the diverse markets, a key word you can use to perk someone's ears up, specifically in the diverse market, is the idea of generational wealth. One generation ahead, one generation behind, right? Our parents don't know, so we have to teach them, our generation, and then our children, right? That idea of generational wealth, the idea of exponential growth over multiple generations. Everybody wants a piece of that, Michelle. So we started the conversation of, let's talk about the generation. So once we had her set up, we said, okay, let's protect you and your business. And let's protect the things. Let's grow the assets you have and protect the things you care about the most, right? That's our job. Our job is simple, is to help you accumulate assets, protect it, and protect the things you care about the most, right? So it makes smart decisions with money. That's our job, right? It may be insurance, it may be investments, whatever it is at the time. And so we got to a place where I said, okay, so let's pressure test our structure.
Mm.
I said, let's pressure test this, right? And under heat and pressure, a lot of things will break. So let's test this. You mentioned your parents are in pretty good financial shape, because I remember she said, I said, how's your parents? She's like, they're great. They're retired, blah blah blah. And I said, okay, 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 got it. So now that your parents are good, they're healthy, they're okay. If your parents have to utilize any type of care of any sorts, how long will their assets last? And I asked the question, and she didn't have an answer. And I said, if they happen, or if something happens to one of them, and then just there happens to be a simultaneous event where one person gets sick and then another person it happens, what happens? And she goes, that would be catastrophic.
Mm.
And I said, I'm looking at this and I think, is that something that we want to at least mitigate, or at least have a conversation around? And she said, absolutely. We definitely have to consider that. And so we started talking about her parents. Once we started talking about her parents, we realized that her parents' assets, who she said was, well, they're okay, wouldn't be enough to last 4 years for either parent.
Right.
And so she said, I want to make sure my parents are going to be okay, because my brother doesn't have the wherewithal to take care of them. It's going to fall on me.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. So we took care of the parents. Well, then she got engaged and had a child. And I remember having the conversation. She goes, that parent proofing thing? That thing we talked about? That thing, the parent thing. I said, yeah, we did it for your parents. She goes, I need to do this with his parents too, because we need to do it, because his dad is not around, but his mom, she's already said she's going to come move in with me if something happens.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, that's not happening, I'm telling you. So we need to parent proof her too. I said, okay, got it. So we had a conversation, same thing. And it was a beautiful thing, because we were able to actually do some things with her business that it made it even more tax advantageous for her and the business. And it really was a win-win. And it allowed for me to be comfortable with, if something happens around my client, that earthquake won't be disastrous for our plan, and won't break the plan that essentially we're in the accumulation phase of our planning.
It is so powerful, and that resonates, parent proofing. And anytime we can say something in a way that gets clients to say, what do you mean? And allows us to explain it, and it feels real to them. I think it's awesome. And you've done the same with yourself. You explained that, shared that personal story last time. I don't know if that was your next example or not, but in the last 5 minutes, I'd love to hear that one. And then also just parting words on what you would share with all of the financial professionals on this call. Where do they start? What do they need to change about their process, about their approach, that can help them to serve more people? So I'll let you take over.
Well, Michelle, the story you're mentioning is my mother's story, right? And my mother last year, it's funny, I use her as an example, because my mother has always said, I love my mother, but she's always said, I'm never going to a nursing home. And I said, I understand. I get it. My sister's not in a position to help take care of I get it. Right. So I said to her one day, I said, you're going to retire. Got it. And I said, you didn't take advantage of that tax thing. And she's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're not going to use it, I'm going to use it then. She goes, well, what, you're not going to use my tax anything, right? And so I started to look at the impact of what it could potentially mean if my mother needs care. My goal is to keep her in her home and to have people kind of take care of her. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to look at it from my business perspective of what the impact it could possibly have. So I started to look at long-term care on my mother, and some of the tax implications of me doing that. I am an S corporation, and there's things I can do, and put her on a payroll, and there's a bunch of things I can do, right? So I did exactly that, right? And we purchased long-term care on my mom, and we were at dinner one day, and my mother said, So do you think I can get my tax thing back? Because I heard you told me you were going to use it. I said you weren't even going to use it. What do you mean? So I think we start at home, right? And I think we look at that and we look at ourselves and we say, there's a lot of successful people on this call. And if you look at it, you say, you know what, this could impact me in a way. We have to look at that and say, okay, what can I do? What can I do with my practice so then I can make sure that my parents are going to be okay? What can I do to ensure my parents are going to be okay? And we're not utilizing their tax, right? But I think when you mention tax advantageous or you miss something, I think people eyes open up. They're like, what do you mean? I missed something? Wait a minute. The changes that have happened, I missed that? I didn't know that. Well, no one's told me that because the information, Dr. Google, the Google advisor doesn't necessarily tell you, right? When you click Google, it doesn't tell you, hey, by the way, this is something that you should be taking advantage of. And even on the tax alternatives, I've targeted a lot of accountants
Mhm.
and sent them things to say, are you having this conversation with your client?
Mm.
Because if not, these fiduciary rules are kind of sketchy. They can come back and say, you knew about these tax advantages and you didn't tell me. And quite frankly, you're just as liable for this as I am because you're not signing off on that disclosure. So I've tried having conversations with accountants. We've had a luncheon, forums on how do we get this out to our clientele, at an exponential pace. And then, so Michelle, on the diversity thing, last but not least, I just simply tell us to start at home, do business with people that don't look like you, and be very intentional with what we do. I think our opportunity to make an impact is great. We're a DEI call here, but this is not where it ends. This is truly, and you guys have heard me speak before, this is a grassroots effort to change the insurance industry in a positive way, where it gives people a choice about the freedom of wealth that they decide to give to their family. And the quote I'll leave you with is time is not refundable. So use it with intent. We have to be purposeful with our actions and our intent, and we have to be mindful of the people we love and we care about. And this is always fun with you, and I'm sure all these wonderful people out there. And I can't wait when we can get back together and participate in a NAFA event.
It was my honor, as it always is, to co-present with you. Chris, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for giving me so much to work with here. I've got so many ideas, so thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to Stephen. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris and Michelle. You guys are amazing. I mean, yes, you're right, Chris. We got to get back together and by the way, I love that white suit because I got to stand up and do the standing ovation. It just feels really weird as I'm writing all my notes here. Going feverishly. I love that parent proofing. And, there's been a whole bunch of people talking about changing the narrative and the point about access to choice and instead of relying on families, let's start relying on our assets. The real takeaway for me was, that whatever the persona of our community and the culture, it's really about education, options, choices that lead to freedom. So thank you so much, Chris and Michelle, for helping us, understand more and to take immediate takeaways and apply it to our business, so that we can spread that message and reach even more people. Well, it's time to give our over-zoomed eyes a break. So let's take a moment away, but make sure to be back here before 2 o'clock Eastern to meet and hear the stories of 3 amazing African-American women.